When you close your eyes, picture the American Revolution. What do you see? I bet it's a lot of powdered wigs. Maybe George Washington on a horse, looking very serious. And probably a bunch of guys who all look, well, pretty much the same. It's like a historical drama with a very specific casting call. We have this myth that the fight for America's soul was fought only by a certain type of person. But the reality is way more interesting and complicated. The Continental Army was surprisingly diverse, and no unit showed, this more clearly than a legendary group of soldiers from the smallest state. Let's talk about the 1st Rhode Island Regiment. Now, this wasn't just any old group of guys with muskets. This was a unit that looked more like the America we know today than the one we see in old paintings. Here's a fact that might make you lean in a little closer. By 1778, this regiment was one of the first in the Continental Army to officially enlist black soldiers enslaved free. For a time, it was the only regiment where black soldiers served together in their own companies. So, who were these men who made up the 1st Rhode Island Regiment? They were a true cross-section of a society in flux, a collection of individuals with vastly different reasons for risking their lives. You had seasoned white Continentals, men who had been with the cause from the early days, driven by a belief in independence. They were farmers, blacksmiths, merchants, who had traded their tools for muskets, convinced that the sacrifice was worth the prize of self-governance. For them, the fight was a clear-cut battle for political freedom. Then you had the free black men who joined the ranks. For them, the decision was layered with complexity and hope. Enlisting was a powerful assertion of citizenship and humanity in a world that routinely denied them both. It was a chance to earn steady pay, a uniform that commanded a measure of respect and the promise of a bounty. But more than that, it was a profound act of faith, a belief that by spilling their blood for the nation's birth, they could secure a better, freer future for themselves and their families. Life for the soldiers of the 1st Rhode Island Regiment was anything but easy. The glamour of the uniform quickly faded against the harsh realities of military life. Their days were a grueling cycle of drills under the watchful eye of officers like Baron von Steuben, who was brought in to whip the Continental Army into a professional fighting force. They learned to march in formation until their feet were raw, to load and fire their muskets with speed and precision, and most importantly, to trust the men standing next to them regardless of their background. This shared hardship and intense training began to meld them into a cohesive unit. The camp was a world of its own, a place where survival depended on cooperation. The men shared flimsy tents that offered little protection from the bitter cold of a New England winter or the suffocating humidity of a southern summer. Food was often scarce and monotonous, a repetitive diet of fire-baked bread, salted meat, and whatever they could forage. Sickness swept through the camps, just as lethally as any enemy musket ball. Yet within this environment of constant struggle, a unique bond was formed. The autumn of 1781 found the British Army under General Cornwallis trapped in the port town of Yorktown, Virginia. It was the endgame. American forces, French forces, had them surrounded by land and sea, slowly tightening the noose with a massive siege. The air was thick with tension and the constant boom of cannon fire. In this decisive moment, the 1st Rhode Island Regiment was given one of the most critical jobs. They were assigned to hold a forward trench, or redoubt, on the far right flank of the American line. It was an exposed position, a place where any attack would be fierce and direct, and the attack came. Under the cover of darkness, British troops, Hessian troops, launched a desperate assault, hoping to break through the American lines and disrupt the siege. The night exploded into a terrifying chaos of musket flashes, So why does the story of a single regiment from a tiny state, from a war over 2 centuries ago, still matter so much to us today? It matters because the 1st Rhode Island Regiment stands as a powerful, tangible example of the American ideal in action. In a time when the nation's founding creed of all men are created equal was more of a question than a statement, these soldiers offered an answer. Unite under a common purpose, fight with extraordinary bravery, achieve something great together. Their story is a bright spot of unity in a history often defined by division. Of course, we have to be honest about the ending. The victory at Yorktown did not magically erase prejudice. After the war, many of the black veterans who had fought for freedom still had to fight for their rights and were often denied the equality they had earned. Native Americans who had sided with the Patriots soon found that the new United States was just as hungry for their land as the British had been. The promise of the Revolution was not fully delivered to everyone who fought for it. This is the hard, complicated truth that accompanies their heroic tale.